Hello, my strong and fearless friends. Life is unpredictable, sometimes cruel and often unfair, especially for women who dare to stand up for themselves. But what if the darkest moments of your life became the fuel for your greatest victory? In today's story, we step into a world of power, betrayal, and resilience. A world where one woman refused to stay silent, where courage was her only weapon, and where justice came with an unexpected twist. But before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from today? Let's connect in the comments below. I never imagined I would be the one to bring down the most powerful man in our company. But fate had other plans that would change everything. When I first walked into Rivera Tech 3 years ago, I was nothing but a nervous college graduate with a wrinkled resume and shoes I had polished 4 times that morning. The building itself loomed over me, 60 floors of glass and steel stretching into the sky, a place designed to remind you just how small you were in the grand scheme of things. Mark Rivera, the CEO and founder, was more than just a businessman. He was a legend. A self-made billionaire by 30, the innovator of the year for 3 years running, and the man whose face was splashed across every major business magazine from Forbes to Time. Everyone wanted to work for him, including me. Congratulations, Elena. Welcome to the team, the HR manager said, shaking my hand firmly. Mr. Rivera personally reviews all final candidates for executive floor positions. He must have seen something special in you. I should have been thrilled. Instead, I felt a strange chill crawl down my spine, like I'd just stepped into something far bigger than I could ever imagine. I remember how my heart jumped at those words. The great Mark Rivera had noticed me? Felt like winning the lottery. Little did I know that being chosen by him wasn't the prize I thought it was. My first week was a blur of orientation sessions, security clearances, and meeting more people than I could possibly remember. Then Friday came, and with it, my first encounter with the man himself. He was taller in person than he looked in photos, with sharp eyes that seemed to cut right through you. His smile was perfect, too perfect, like it had been designed by a team of marketing experts. Elena Reyes, our new junior analyst, he said, extending his hand. I've heard good things. Don't disappoint me. His handshake was firm, a little too firm, fingers holding mine just a second longer than necessary. The time I wrote it off as my imagination. I was new, nervous, reading too much into things. 6 months later, I was thriving. My reports were being circulated at executive meetings, my projections had helped secure a major client, and I'd even been mentioned in Rivera's quarterly address as the new talent to watch. Seemed too good to be true. And it was. The first red flag came during a late-night session preparing for a major presentation. Most of the team had gone home, but I was determined to perfect my slides. That's when Rivera stepped out of the elevator, surprised to find someone still working. Dedication. I like that, he said, loosening his tie as he walked over to my desk. You know, Elena, I've been watching your progress closely. Very closely. His hand landed on my shoulder, heavy and warm. I think you're ready for more responsibility. Why don't you join me for dinner tomorrow? We can discuss your future at Rivera Tech. Something in his tone made my stomach twist. This wasn't a normal business dinner invitation. I made an excuse, a family commitment I couldn't break. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Family first, I understand. But Elena, opportunities like this don't come along often. Remember that. Following week, I was removed from a key project without explanation. When I asked my manager why, she avoided eye contact. Orders from above, was all she said. Things got worse from there. Reports I submitted were suddenly questioned, ideas I presented in meetings were dismissed, and somehow my access to certain company systems was restricted. I wasn't being fired, that would be too obvious. I was being pushed out slowly, methodically. Stay with me here because what happened next changed everything, not just for me but for dozens of other women at Rivera Tech. If you've ever felt powerless against someone who seems untouchable, you know exactly how I felt in those dark days. But sometimes the very thing meant to break you becomes the tool that helps you bring down a giant. One evening, while working late again, I received an email that wasn't meant for me. Someone in HR had accidentally included me in a thread discussing Rivera situations, a coded term for sexual harassment complaints against the CEO. There were 17 cases in the last year alone, all quietly settled with money and NDAs. 17 women who had been silenced. I sat there, staring at my screen, fingers curled into fists. I wasn't alone. I had never been alone. And suddenly I knew what I had to do. The next morning, instead of going to my desk, I walked straight to Diane Winter's office. Diane was our chief financial officer, the highest-ranking woman in the company, and the only executive who had ever openly challenged Rivera in meetings. If anyone would listen, it would be her. "Do you have any evidence?" she asked after I told her everything, her face giving nothing away. I slid my phone across her desk, showing her the email thread. Her eyes widened just slightly as she scrolled. "This is concerning," she said carefully. "But Elena, you need to understand what you're doing. Mark Rivera isn't just any CEO. He's built this company from nothing. The board worships him. Going against him isn't just career suicide, it's putting a target on your back." "There are 17 women in that email, Ms. Winters," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Probably more who never reported anything. How many does it take before someone does something?" She stared at me for a long moment, then handed back my phone. "Be in my office tomorrow at 7 a.m. Come through the service entrance, not the main lobby. And Elena, don't tell anyone about this. Not even people you trust." I nodded, my heart pounding so loud I was sure she could hear it. As I stood to leave, she added, "You're either very brave or very foolish. I'm not sure which yet." Honestly, I wasn't sure either. I arrived at Diane Winter's office at exactly 7 a.m. the next morning, having barely slept. The service entrance was hidden in the back of the building, away from security cameras and the morning rush of employees. A security guard I'd never seen before nodded at me silently and unlocked the door. "Ms. Winters is waiting for you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The hallways were eerily quiet as I made my way to her office. When I knocked, the door opened immediately, revealing not just Diane but 3 other people I recognized as senior executives: James Lang from operations, Terrence Wong from legal, and Amara Johnson, the new head of HR who had only been with the company for 2 months. "Elena," Diane said, her voice clipped. "Thank you for coming. Please sit." The atmosphere in the room was tense, like the air before a storm. I took the only empty chair, acutely aware of everyone's eyes on me. "Before we begin," Diane said, "I need you to understand something. What we discuss here doesn't leave this room. If word gets back to Rivera before we're ready, this all falls apart. Are we clear?" I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. "Good." She slid a stack of folders across the table. "After you left yesterday, I had Terrence pull every settlement agreement Rivera has authorized in the past 5 years. We found patterns. Disturbing ones." Terrence adjusted his glasses. 27 women, Elena. All with stories similar to what you experienced. Dinners, promotions offered, then retaliation when they refused his advances. I flipped through the documents, each one outlining a payment and an ironclad NDA. Names were redacted, but the amounts weren't, some as high as $300,000. "Why hasn't anyone stopped him?" I asked, unable to hide the anger in my voice. James sighed. "Rivera isn't just the CEO. He owns 40% of the company. The board won't touch him without overwhelming evidence. One complaint? They'll call it a misunderstanding. Even 5 complaints can be dismissed as disgruntled employees. But 27? We need your help," Amara said, leaning forward. "These NDAs make it almost impossible for these women to speak. But you haven't signed anything. You're still free to talk." My heart started racing again. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Dan's eyes met mine. "We need you to wear a wire. Get Rivera on record. One clear admission of what he's been doing and we can take him down. The room went silent. I stared at them, not quite believing what I was hearing. You want me to spy on the CEO? The man who's already trying to push me out. Not just spy, Terrence clarified. We need you to get close to him. Make him think you've changed your mind about that dinner. Let him believe you're finally playing his game. I stood up so quickly my chair nearly fell over. You're asking me to put myself in exactly the situation these other women were trying to avoid. Do you understand what you're asking? Amara reached out, her hand gently touching my arm. We do, Elena. And we wouldn't ask if there was another way. But these NDAs are airtight. None of these women can speak without risking everything. You're our only chance. What about my safety? I demanded. What happens when I'm alone with him? James pulled out what looked like a normal lipstick tube. This has a panic button. Press it and security will be there in under 2 minutes. We'll have people watching. You won't be alone. I took the lipstick, turning it over in my hands. And if I say no? Diane's expression softened slightly. Then we understand. We'll find another way. But Rivera has hurt too many people, Elena. He's destroyed careers, lives. And he'll keep doing it unless someone stops him. I closed my eyes, thinking about those 27 women. About how easily I could have been number 28. How easily someone else would become number 29 if nothing changed. When? I asked finally. Tomorrow night, Diane said. Rivera's hosting a dinner for potential investors. We'll make sure you're seated at his table. The goal is to get him to invite you for a private meeting afterward. Terrence handed me a small box. Inside is the wire. It looks like a normal necklace. The microphone is in the pendant. Just press the side to activate it. I took the box, my hand trembling slightly. What if he realizes what I'm doing? He won't, James assured me. Men like Rivera are too arrogant to imagine anyone would dare to challenge them. That's his weakness. As I left through the same service entrance, the weight of what I'd agreed to settled on my shoulders. I was going up against one of the most powerful men in the tech industry, a billionaire with connections everywhere. If this went wrong, my career wouldn't just be over, my life as I knew it would be finished. That afternoon, an email arrived from Rivera's executive assistant. Mr. Rivera requests your presence at tomorrow's investor dinner. Business attire. Car will pick you up at 7 p.m. It was happening. There was no turning back now. I spent that night researching Rivera more thoroughly than I ever had before. Beyond the glossy magazine covers and glowing profiles was a different story, rumors of business partners who mysteriously backed out of deals, competitors whose companies suddenly faced investigations, journalists who wrote critical pieces and then disappeared from major publications. Mark Rivera wasn't just powerful. He was dangerous. 6 p.m. the next day, I stood in front of my mirror, barely recognizing myself. I'd chosen a conservative black dress, nothing provocative. I wanted to be taken seriously. The necklace Terrence had given me hung around my neck, the small silver pendant resting just below my collarbone. Inside it was the microphone that could either save dozens of women or destroy my life. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Car outside. Remember, press the pendant once when you're alone with him. We'll be listening. Good luck. The driver opened the door without a word. As the car pulled away from my apartment, I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. I was either about to become a hero or a cautionary tale. Only the next few hours would tell which. The restaurant was on the top floor of a skyscraper downtown, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Rivera had reserved the entire place for his investor dinner. As I stepped out of the elevator, a hostess immediately approached me. Ms. Reyes? Mr. Rivera mentioned you would be joining us. Please follow me. She led me through tables of people in expensive suits and designer dresses. I recognized tech executives, venture capitalists, and even a few celebrities known for their tech investments. The hostess stopped at a large round table where Rivera sat at the center, like a king holding court. He looked up, his eyes locking with mine. "Elena, there you are. I saved you a seat." He patted the empty chair beside him. "Everyone, this is Elena Reyes, one of our rising stars." The table's occupants gave me polite nods as I sat down. Rivera leaned close, his shoulder touching mine. "You look beautiful tonight," he whispered, his breath hot against my ear. I forced a smile. "Thank you, Mr. Rivera." "Mark," he corrected. "We're among friends here." The dinner progressed with Rivera skillfully guiding the conversation, highlighting the company's achievements and future plans. He was charismatic, making everyone feel special with his focused attention and well-timed compliments. I could see why people were drawn to him, why they invested millions based on his words alone. Throughout the meal, his hand kept finding reasons to touch mine, passing the salt, reaching for his glass, emphasizing a point in conversation. Touch made my skin crawl, but I maintained my smile, laughing at his jokes, nodding at his stories. As dessert was being served, Rivera stood and addressed the room. "Thank you all for coming tonight. Rivera Tech wouldn't be where it is without visionaries like yourselves who recognize true potential." He raised his glass. "To partnerships that will shape the future." Everyone applauded. As he sat back down, he turned to me. "I have meetings in the private dining room after this. Why don't you join me? I'd like to discuss that special project we mentioned earlier." My heart jumped. This was it, exactly what Diane and the others had hoped for. I touched the pendant discreetly, making sure it was secure. "I'd be honored," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. An hour later, as the dinner wound down, Rivera gestured for me to follow him. We walked through a door hidden behind a decorative screen, entering a smaller, more intimate room with a single table and a bottle of expensive champagne already open. "Finally," Rivera sighed, closing the door behind us. "Those dinners are necessary, but exhausting. So much posturing, so many egos to massage." He poured 2 glasses of champagne, handing one to me. "But you understand that, don't you, Elena? You're smart. You see how the game is played." I accepted the glass but didn't drink. "What game is that?" He smiled, moving closer. "Power. Influence. The careful dance of knowing who to please and who to push." His fingers brushed my shoulder, tracing the strap of my dress. "I've watched you navigate the company politics. You have instincts. Raw talent. That's rare." I shifted slightly, not enough to reject his touch, but enough to maintain some distance. "Is that why you invited me tonight?" "Partly." He took a sip of his champagne. "You intrigue me, Elena. Most people in this company are so transparent. Their ambitions, their weaknesses, I can read them like books. But you've always kept something back. Until recently, I thought it was just professionalism. Now I wonder if it's something more." I felt the pendant against my skin, heavy with purpose. "What changed your mind?" "Your work started slipping. Projects delayed, reports with inconsistencies. Not like you at all." He set down his glass, his eyes never leaving mine. "Then I realized you're distracted, fighting against something. Or someone." My breath caught. Did he know? Had someone warned him? "I don't understand," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Don't you?" His hand moved to my waist now, firm and possessive. "I think you've been fighting your attraction to me. The same way I've been fighting my interest in you." Relief washed over me. He didn't know, his ego was too big to see the truth. Now was my chance. I pressed the pendant discreetly, activating the microphone. "Mr. Rivera, Mark, are you suggesting—" "I'm suggesting," he interrupted, pulling me closer, "that we stop pretending. I can make your career, Elena. Vice president by 30. your own department, your own budget, all the things you've worked for. And what would I need to do for these opportunities? I asked, making sure my words were clear for the recording. His smile widened. Start by staying the night. I have a suite upstairs. We can get to know each other better, discuss your future in more comfortable surroundings. I allowed my expression to shift from surprise to consideration, as if weighing his offer. And if I said no? What happens to my position at Rivera Tech? His eyes hardened for just a moment before his smile returned. Why focus on negatives? But since you ask, business is business. I need people I can trust in key positions. Trust comes from intimacy, understanding each other completely. And the other women? The ones who filed complaints against you, did they misunderstand the arrangement? His grip on my waist tightened. What women? The 27 who signed NDAs after reporting sexual harassment. Was that also just business? Rivera's face transformed instantly. The charming mask fell away, replaced by cold fury. Who have you been talking to? I tried to step back, but his grip held me in place. Let go of me. You little bitch, he hissed. You think you can come after me? Do you have any idea who I am, what I can do? I know exactly who you are, I replied, no longer hiding my disgust. And so will everyone else once they hear this recording. His eyes dropped to my necklace. In one violent motion, he grabbed the pendant and ripped it from my neck, throwing it across the room where it smashed against the wall. What recording? He sneered. You have nothing. Fear shot through me like ice water. The lipstick, I needed to press the panic button. But my purse was on the table, too far to reach. Rivera backed me against the wall, his face inches from mine. You're finished. Not just at Rivera Tech. In this entire industry. No one crosses me and works again. I tried to duck under his arm, but he slammed his hand against the wall, blocking my escape. You're not going anywhere until we resolve this. Take your hands off her, Mark. We both turned toward the voice. Diane Winters stood in the doorway, her phone held up, recording everything. Diane? Rivera's confusion quickly turned to anger. This doesn't concern you. Get out. Actually, it does concern me. She stepped into the room, followed by Terrence Wong and 2 security guards I didn't recognize. As CFO, I have a fiduciary duty to protect the company from liability. And you, Mark, have become our biggest liability. Rivera laughed, though I could hear the tension in it. You're out of your mind. The board will never believe you over me. The board already knows, Terrence said, holding up a tablet. We're on a live call with them right now. They've heard everything. Rivera's face drained of color. He stepped away from me, straightening his jacket as if trying to regain his composure. This is absurd. A setup. You can't. We can and we have, Diane cut him off. Your access to all company systems has been revoked. Purity is clearing out your office as we speak. It's over, Mark. The security guards moved forward. One of them spoke into his radio. We have him. Bringing him down now. As they escorted Rivera out, he turned back to me, his eyes burning with hatred. This isn't over. You have no idea what you've started. When they were gone, my legs finally gave out. I sank to the floor, my whole body trembling. Diane rushed over, kneeling beside me. Are you okay? Did he hurt you? I shook my head, unable to speak. The adrenaline that had kept me going was draining away, leaving me hollow. You did it, Elena, she said, squeezing my shoulder. You were incredible. When he destroyed the necklace, I thought we'd lost everything, but you kept him talking long enough for us to get here with backup. Is it really over? I whispered. Terrence joined us, his expression grim. Not quite. The board has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. They want you there, Elena. Your testimony will be crucial. I looked up at them, suddenly understanding the full weight of what lay ahead. He threatened me, said I'd never work again. Diane helped me to my feet. He can't hurt you anymore. The company will protect you. But as they led me out of the restaurant, Rivera's words echoed in my mind. This isn't over. And somehow I knew he was right. A man like Mark Rivera wouldn't go down without a fight. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a war. The next morning, I stood in front of the Rivera Tech Board of Directors, 12 men and 3 women, all watching me with expressions ranging from sympathy to open skepticism. The boardroom was intimidatingly large, with a polished table that reflected the ceiling lights like water. My voice echoed slightly as I recounted everything, from Rivera's initial dinner invitation to the confrontation in the private dining room. "And you have proof of these allegations?" asked Jonathan Mercer, the board chairman, his fingers steepled in front of him. Diane stepped forward, placing a tablet on the table. The recording from Ms. Rhea's necklace captured the initial conversation before Mr. Rivera destroyed it. My phone recorded the rest, including his threats. She played both recordings. The room fell silent as Rivera's voice filled the air, first smooth and seductive, then angry and threatening. I watched their faces change as they listened, particularly the women, whose expressions hardened with each word. When the recording ended, Mercer cleared his throat. "Ms. Reyes, the board would like to thank you for your courage. Would you mind stepping outside while we discuss this matter privately?" I nodded and left, my legs still shaky. In the hallway, I slumped into a chair, exhaustion washing over me. I hadn't slept at all, jumping at every sound in my apartment, half expecting Rivera to show up at my door. Nearly an hour passed before Diane emerged from the boardroom, her face unreadable. "What happened?" I asked, standing quickly. "Rivera's been terminated, effective immediately," she said. "The board voted unanimously. They're issuing a press release this afternoon citing misconduct incompatible with company values as the reason." Relief flooded through me. "So it's really over?" Diane's expression remained serious. "Not exactly. The board wants to avoid a public scandal, which means they're offering Rivera a generous severance package in exchange for his silence." What? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything he did, they're paying him off? "Welcome to corporate America," she said bitterly. "They're also offering settlements to all 27 women who signed NDAs, on the condition that no one speaks publicly about what happened." My relief curdled into anger. So everything gets swept under the rug? Rivera walks away rich and no one ever knows what he did? The board believes it's in the company's best interest. What about the next company he works for? I interrupted. What about all the women there who don't know what he's capable of? Diane sighed. I agree with you, Elena. But this isn't my decision to make. As we walked to the elevator, a notification popped up on my phone. It was an email from HR asking me to come to their office immediately. My stomach dropped. What now? I whispered. Amara Johnson was waiting for me, her expression sympathetic but professional. Elena, please sit down. I braced myself for bad news. Was I being fired too? Had Rivera somehow turned this around on me? The board has made some decisions about the company's future leadership, Amara began. In light of recent events, they feel Rivera Tech needs a significant change in culture and direction. She slid a folder across her desk. They're creating a new position, Head of Employee Advocacy and Ethics. The role will report directly to the board and have authority to investigate any complaints of misconduct, regardless of who they involve. I stared at the folder, not understanding. They're offering you the position, Elena, with a substantial salary increase and a seat at the executive table. My mouth fell open. Me? But I'm just a junior analyst. I don't have the experience. What you have, Amara interrupted gently, is integrity and courage. That's what this company needs right now. I opened the folder and looked at the offer letter. The salary made me gasp. It was 4 times what I currently made. But something felt wrong. This feels like a bribe, I said slowly. To keep me quiet about what really happened. Amara didn't deny it. The board wants to move forward. This is their way of doing that while also making genuine changes. I need time to think about this. Of course, she replied. They've given you until Monday to decide. I left the building in a daze, my mind spinning. On the street, I passed a newsstand with business magazines prominently displaying Rivera's face. The same charming smile, the same carefully crafted image of success. By next month, those covers would feature someone else, and Rivera would fade from public memory, his crimes buried under NDAs and settlements, unless someone spoke out. That night, my apartment felt especially empty. I poured a glass of wine and sat on my balcony, staring at the city lights. My phone buzzed with a text from Diane. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. I opened my laptop and looked at the offer letter again. The job itself was everything I'd ever wanted: influence, respect, the power to protect others. But accepting it meant becoming part of the system that protected men like Rivera. Then my phone rang, an unknown number. My hand trembled as I answered. Hello? Elena Reyes? A woman's voice, unfamiliar. Yes. Who is this? My name is Melissa Torres. I worked at Rivera Tech 3 years ago. I was one of the women who filed a complaint against Mark Rivera. My breath caught. How did you get my number? Amara Johnson contacted me. She said you might be willing to talk. To hear my story. Over the next hour, Melissa told me everything: the harassment, the retaliation when she refused Rivera's advances, the settlement she was pressured to accept, the NDA that silenced her. The money didn't last, she said bitterly. But the damage to my career? That's permanent. No one will hire me for the positions I'm qualified for. It's like I'm blacklisted. I'm so sorry, I whispered. Don't be sorry, she replied. Be loud. Rivera's not the only one. There are men like him in every company, and they count on our silence. After we hung up, I sat for a long time thinking about Melissa, about the 26 other women, about all the women who would come after them if nothing changed. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I walked into Amara's office on Monday with my decision. She looked up expectantly. Have you considered the offer? I have, I said, placing the folder on her desk. I'm declining the position. Her face fell. Elena, this is an incredible opportunity. I'm declining because I'm going public with my story, I continued. All of it. Rivera, the boards cover up everything. Amara's eyes widened. The NDAs don't apply to me. I never signed one. The board will fight this. They'll say you're violating confidentiality agreements from your employment contract. They might sue you. I nodded. I know. But someone has to speak the truth, whatever the cost. As I turned to leave, Amara called after me. Elena, wait. She reached into her drawer and pulled out a flash drive. If you're really doing this, you should have all the facts. Every complaint, every settlement, every email where the board discussed covering for Rivera. I've been collecting them for months. I stared at her in shock. You could lose your job for this. She smiled sadly. Some things are more important than a job. That afternoon, I met with a journalist from The Observer, the same reporter who had mysteriously stopped writing about tech companies after an unspecified disagreement with Rivera. She listened intently as I told my story, her eyes lighting up with vindication when I handed her Amara's flash drive. This is enough to bring down not just Rivera but half the board, she said, scrolling through the files. Are you sure you're ready for what comes next? Once this story breaks, your life will never be the same. I thought about Melissa Torres, about the 26 other women, about all the women who would come after them if nothing changed. I'm ready, I said. 3 days later, the story broke. Tech titans fall. Sexual harassment, corporate cover UPS, and the woman who exposed it all. My phone started ringing non-stop, journalists, lawyers, other women coming forward with their own stories about Rivera and other executives. Rivera tech stock plummeted. The board issued frantic statements, then went silent as shareholders demanded their resignation. I received both death threats and thank you notes. Former colleagues alternately praised my courage and accused me of destroying the company. Through it all, I kept reminding myself of what Melissa had said: be loud. A week after the story broke, I received another call from an unknown number. This time, I almost didn't answer, exhausted by the constant media attention. But something made me pick up. Ms. Reyes? This is Catherine Lynn from the State Attorney General's office. We've been following your story with great interest. Would you be willing to come in and speak with us? We're considering opening a criminal investigation. And just like that, the private scandal became a public reckoning. 6 months after the story broke, I sat in a crowded courthouse, watching as Mark Rivera was led in by officers. He wore an expensive suit, but his confident swagger was gone. He didn't look at me, but I could feel his hatred from across the room. The state attorney general had built a case against him that went far beyond sexual harassment. The evidence Amara provided revealed financial fraud, witness tampering, and even blackmail. Rivera had used company funds to silence his victims and threatened those who refused to comply. All rise for the Honorable Judge Williams, the bailiff announced. As the proceedings began, I felt a hand squeeze mine. Melissa Torres sat beside me, along with 5 other women who had come forward after my story was published. We had formed a support group of sorts, meeting weekly to share our experiences and help each other heal. The state calls Elena Reyes to the stand. Walking to the witness box felt like crossing an ocean. Every eye in the courtroom followed me, reporters scribbling notes, Rivera's defense team watching like hawks, and Rivera himself finally looking up, his face a mask of cold contempt. After I was sworn in, the prosecutor approached. Ms. Reyes, please tell the court about your first inappropriate encounter with the defendant. For the next hour, I recounted everything: the dinner invitation, the retaliation, the final confrontation in the restaurant. Each word felt like setting down a burden I'd been carrying for too long. During cross-examination, Rivera's attorney tried to paint me as an opportunist, a failed employee seeking revenge. Isn't it true that your work performance had declined in the months before these alleged incidents? He asked. My work was deliberately sabotaged after I refused Mr. Rivera's advances, I replied calmly. The company records show consistently positive evaluations until after that dinner invitation. And you expect the jury to believe that a man like Mark Rivera, who could have anyone he wanted, would risk everything to pursue you? There was a murmur in the courtroom. Prosecutor stood to object, but I answered before she could. Mr. Rivera didn't pursue me because he was attracted to me, I said, looking directly at Rivera. He pursued me because I was valuable to the company but not powerful enough to fight back. This was never about attraction. It was about power. Rivera's face darkened. For a moment, the mask slipped, and the entire courtroom saw the truth in his eyes. The trial lasted 3 weeks. One by one, women took the stand to tell their stories. Financial experts testified about the misappropriation of funds. Former board members admitted to covering up complaints. Even Diane Winters testified, explaining how the company had systematically protected Rivera at the expense of his victims. When the jury returned with their verdict, the courtroom fell silent. On the charge of sexual harassment, we find the defendant guilty. My heart leaped. On the charge of financial fraud, we find the defendant guilty. Melissa squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. On the charge of witness tampering, we find the defendant guilty. Rivera sat motionless, his face ashen. As the judge announced a sentencing date, reporters rushed out to break the news. Rivera was led away in handcuffs, still not looking at any of us. It should have felt like victory, but mostly I felt empty. Exhausted. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. I stood at the top of the steps with Melissa and the other women, all of us holding hands in a line of solidarity. "Ms. Reyes, what's next for you?" someone called out. It was a question I'd been asking myself for months. My savings were nearly depleted. No tech company would hire me now. I was too controversial, too difficult. The job offers I did receive were from places that wanted to use me as a token, a symbol of their commitment to women's rights without making any real changes. As I hesitated, Melissa stepped forward. "We're not done fighting," she said firmly. "This isn't just about Rivera. It's about changing the system that protected him." That night, we gathered at my apartment, me, Melissa, and the other women from the trial. We ordered pizza and opened wine, celebrating the verdict but also mourning the careers we'd lost, the years of silence, the damage that couldn't be undone. "I got another rejection today," said Priya, who had been a senior developer before Rivera forced her out. "As soon as they Google my name and see I was part of the trial, the interviews suddenly get cancelled." Others nodded in agreement. We were labeled as troublemakers, as risks. No one said it directly, but the message was clear. Speaking up had cost us our futures in tech. "So we make our own future," I said suddenly, an idea forming. "What if we started our own company? A tech firm built from the ground up with ethics and accountability at its core?" The room went quiet. "With what money?" Melissa asked. "We're all practically broke from legal fees." "Not anymore," said a voice from the doorway. We all turned to see Diane Winters standing there, holding a folder. I'd given her my spare key months ago when death threats made me afraid to be alone. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, stepping into the room. "But I think you'll want to hear this." She sat down, opening the folder. The Rivera Tech Board was forced to resign after the verdict. The shareholders have appointed new leadership, including me as interim CEO. My jaw dropped. "Diane, that's amazing." She smiled. "It gets better." My first official act was to establish a victims' compensation fund. Every woman affected by Rivera will receive not just a settlement, but also back pay for the years their careers were derailed. She handed me a check with so many zeros I thought it was a mistake. "This isn't charity," Diane continued. "It's restitution. And there's more. The new board wants to establish a foundation to support women in tech and combat workplace harassment. They need someone to run it, someone with first-hand experience and unquestionable integrity." She looked at me pointedly. "You want me to come back?" I asked in disbelief. "Not as an employee," she clarified. "As a partner. The foundation would be independent, with its own funding and board. You would have complete autonomy." As we discussed the possibilities, something occurred to me. What about everyone else? I gestured to the women around me. "They deserve opportunities too." Diane smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. The foundation will need a full staff, people who understand its mission because they've lived it." For the first time in months, I felt something like hope. Not just for myself, but for all of us. Later that night, after everyone had left, I sat on my balcony again, looking at the city lights. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. My heart raced as I opened it, expecting another threat. Instead, I found a simple message. "Thank you for saving me from becoming victim number 28. Sarah, former Rivera tech intern." I held the phone to my chest, tears streaming down my face. One voice had become many. Many voices had become a movement. And somewhere out there, women I would never meet were safer because we had been brave enough to speak up. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in ages. I called Melissa immediately. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday about making our own future," I told her. "I don't want to just run a foundation. I want to build something new." "I'm listening," she said. "What if we use part of our settlements to start our own tech company? One that develops safety tools for women, everything from workplace harassment reporting systems to personal security apps?" Melissa was silent for a moment. You want us to turn our trauma into a product? No, I replied. I want us to turn our experience into protection for others. Who better to design these systems than the people who know exactly what's at stake? By the end of the week, we had a business plan. Priya would lead development. Melissa would handle operations. I would be the public face, the CEO. We called it Safeguard Technologies. Our first investor? Diane Winters herself, who put in her own money before approaching the Rivera Tech Board for additional funding. This isn't just a good investment, she told them. It's a chance to be on the right side of history. 6 months later, our first product launched, a secure, anonymous reporting system for workplace harassment that companies could implement without seeing the individual reports. Instead, the data went to an independent review panel, removing the conflict of interest that had protected Rivera for so long. Orders came flooding in from companies eager to demonstrate their commitment to changing toxic cultures. What they didn't expect was how effective the system would be, how many voices it would amplify, how many patterns it would reveal. The day our system was installed at Rivera Tech, now renamed Horizon Technologies, I walked through the lobby for the first time since the trial. The security guard recognized me and nodded respectfully. Employees stopped to watch as I passed, some smiling, others whispering behind their hands. After dinner, I walked to the small park near their house, the same park where I used to play as a child, fearless and full of dreams. Sitting on a bench, I thought about how far I'd come and how much further there still was to go. My phone rang, Melissa, calling with news about a potential international expansion. As we talked, I watched a group of young girls playing nearby, their laughter carrying across the evening air. They were around 10 years old, confident and carefree, with their whole lives ahead of them. In 15 years, they would be entering the workforce. Because of what we had done, what we were still doing, they might never experience what I and so many others had endured. They might never know what it was like to be silenced, to be afraid, to have to choose between their safety and their careers. That was the true victory. Not the court case, not the successful company, not the speaking engagements or the magazine covers. The real win was in the futures we were helping to create, futures where power couldn't be weaponized so easily, where speaking up was the norm, not the exception. As I ended the call with Melissa, one of the girls noticed me watching and waved shyly. I waved back, hoping she could see in me what I wished I'd seen at her age, proof that standing up for yourself, while difficult and sometimes devastating, was always worth it in the end. Walking back to my car, I passed a newsstand with business magazines on display. Instead of Rivera's face, the covers now featured a new generation of leaders, including me. My latest interview had made the cover of Forbes, the whistleblower who built a movement, how Elena Reyes turned trauma into transformation. I didn't buy the magazine. I didn't need to read about myself to know who I was or what I had accomplished. The true measure of my work wasn't in headlines or accolades, it was in every woman who felt safe enough to speak up, every company that chose accountability over cover-ups, every life that changed because one day I had decided that enough was enough. The sun was setting as I drove home, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles to fight. The work wasn't finished, it might never be. But for the first time, I felt certain that we were winning. Not just me. Not just Safeguard. All of us who had refused to be silenced, who had turned our pain into purpose and our anger into action. Together, we had changed the rules of the game. And no one could ever take that away. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.